Understanding and Measuring Poverty. How Poor is Too Poor by Finn Connor, Chloe Elabash, and Naveed Javed. The first step to understanding and measuring poverty is defining it. So, the first core question is, what is poverty? When you Google it, poverty is defined as the state of being extremely poor. Seems simple enough, right? When you think a little deeper, some problems arise. One might ask, what constitutes extremely poor? What does it mean? How do we measure it? These questions are key to understanding and measuring poverty. When it comes to understanding poverty, it is first important to be able to recognize it. This is the Google image that comes up for the search term poverty. This, to many, is the epitome of poverty. The Catholic Campaign for Human Development attempted to understand the American perception of poverty for the public. They released a poll asking, how would you describe being poor in the United States? Robert Rector summarized the data of the responses by saying, the overwhelming majority of responses focused on homelessness, hunger, or not being able to eat properly, and not being able to meet basic needs. So it seemed not too surprising that the first image for poverty was this image. It presents homelessness and poor living conditions and a lack of food, which are the two main focuses from the Poverty Pulse poll. The people in the photo have dirty clothes and no shoes, and it is implied that they rely on the stream for washing, as they most likely do not have a laundry machine or a dishwasher. The people displayed are children from a racial minority group to particularly vulnerable populations. So we can see that, based off of what most Americans think, this is poverty. Poverty, by this definition, would be a deficit in food, clothing, shelter, and utilities, or FCSUs, as portrayed by the people in the photo. It would probably surprise you that that image isn't what most poverty is. In actuality, the reality of life for those labeled poor by the United States government is very different than the photo portrays. This definition of poverty is by the Official Poverty Measurement, or the OPM, which we will discuss in depth later. Instead of the barren living space we saw in the prior photograph, we see a very different reality for the lives of those living in poverty in America. 99.6% of poor Americans have refrigerators, only slightly off from the 99.9% of the general population that has them. These statistics go beyond what we consider essential. 70.6% of poor households have a DVD player, and almost half have a coffee maker. What is clear from these statistics is this: the reality of poverty goes much deeper than what comes up from a simple Google search. The top Google image should perhaps maybe look something more like this, but looking at this picture, you can't tell who is poor and who is not. Assessing and measuring poverty is very complex, and the stereotypes they usually fall back on tend to be inaccurate. It is clear that we need to view, measure, and define poverty from a more diverse perspective than the majority of Americans currently do. Though, then the question is raised of how can poverty be measured? Because poverty is not something that can be defined scientifically, it can be measured through a series of different forms and tools. There are two main ideologies in terms of poverty measurement: absolute and relative measurements. As stated by John Iceland, absolute measures typically attempt to define a truly basic, absolute need and standard. On the other hand, relative poverty uses the comparative disadvantages to measure poverty. These different approaches are represented in the different tools used to measure poverty, such as the OPM, Official Poverty Measure, SPM, Supplementary Poverty Measure, and the Capabilities Approach to the Measurement of Poverty. What is the OPM, you may ask? The OPM, or the Official Poverty Measure, is an absolute measurement that focuses on how a household is doing based on basic needs. It purely focuses on the monetary aspects of the individual and is calculated by considering what a thrifty food basket would look like multiplied by 3. The approach assumes that the average American household spends 1/3 of their income on food. This assumption is incorrect, as it is actually closer to 1/6 or 1/12 of their total spending. The OPM does not account for non-discretionary expenses and various other factors that are pivotal to understanding poverty. Thus, there are a lot of inherent weaknesses to the measurement that create a problematic view of poverty. This led to the creation of the SPM. The Supplemental Poverty Measure is a relative measure that accounts for geographical adjustments for differences in housing costs, as well as the sum of an individual's cash income plus in-kind benefits that families can use to meet their FCSU needs. This also accounts for taxes, work expenses, and out-of-pocket medical expenses. The SPM also subtracts out non-discretionary costs, such as transportation, medical out-of-pocket payments, and childcare from a family's post tax income. Because the SPM accounts for all of these aspects, it can provide a more accurate measurement of poverty than the OPM. It applies some aspects of the relative approach to poverty while maintaining an absolute measurement in terms of the judgment. Finally, the capabilities approach is a set of possible beings and doings that represent the alternative combinations of functionings that a person can achieve. Functionings are the actions a person is actually doing. The capabilities of a person vary depending on a variety of factors such as personal characteristics and social environment. These are Amartya Sen's 10 central capabilities, which are crucial aspects that contribute to living a dignified life. The capability approach is effective particularly as it provides a more accurate measure of the true nature of the person. An example of this is a monk that chooses to give up material desires and to live a life without much income may not be considered impoverished, given that the monk has the capability of not living that lifestyle. In the OPM or even the SPM, the monk would be considered impoverished based purely on income and other factors. Thus, the question is raised with all this in mind on how we define poverty. Poverty is a comparative lack of capabilities, often rooted in income inadequacy. The definition takes into account the influence of relative measures while understanding that there is an aspect of value in the money as an instrument for elevating oneself out of poverty. This is very different from the Google Dictionary definition given that there are fewer possibilities of misunderstanding and it incorporates the dignity of the impoverished people. And now, the main question, how should poverty be measured? The capabilities approach is the most accurate form of measuring poverty because it takes into account the social, political, and economic environment of an individual aside from just their numerical income. As seen in Dorothy Allison's article, Growing Up Poor, there is an aspect of social oppression that contributes to the state of the impoverished that is rooted in the politics of they. As people tend to put a label on impoverished populations as a whole and assert their superiority over them, creating a power structure fueled out of fear of becoming them. That is why we just can't use one image to epitomize what poverty is. We believe in the capabilities approach because it is pluralist about value and concerned with ingrained social injustice and inequality, while respecting people's right to choice, freedom of opportunity, and self-definition. It does this by letting people choose their own functionings while only judging their capabilities, which emphasize the inherent human right to choice. This important right maintains that the dignity of humans will be respected, which is key to properly judging and assisting in poverty. This is our works cited, which refers to all the articles that have been mentioned, and thank you so much for watching.